Thank you very much for this analysis. And if we look just at the European picture for a moment, we see that there is, in a way, participation, but it is very much a populist kind of party participation. And the analysis we've had previously in this conference about economic inequality and the sort of very well documented fact that working classes lose jobs, lose relative income because of globalization, this has not led to social democratic, socialist participation politically, but to the opposite. And this populist participation is in a way not, it is like a despairing participation, listening to politicians that say, we will fix everything for you, which is impossible. Trump being one example, working class voting for Trump. And I wonder if what we really observe is sort of the complete lack of ideological parties, that ideologies have capitulated. In Europe, they have done so in accepting the internal market globalization agenda. I remember Jacques Delors with Lord Cockfield, this strange ideological pair, one could say, and the enthusiasm for the four freedoms, selling the four freedoms as the big project. And of course, when we're now in 2017 and we see, yes, the middle classes, the countries they have benefited economically, but those that have not are the ones that lose low-skilled jobs to China, to Hungary, to sort of the whole unfair competition concept. And this was protested by the left, Beauvais attack, protesting globalization some 10 years ago. Then it abated, and now the same kind of protests are visible on the right. But this is not, in a way, ideologically based. The right populist protests are not ideologically based at all. They are sort of, somebody speaks about our plight, therefore we support him. So I wonder if one looks at power structures and economic power structures, one has to say, well, if there's going to be a change, there has to be a preference for national jobs for nationals. There has to be Friedrich List resurrected, protection of infant industry. There has to be much stronger sort of boundaries of markets. There has to be a critique of the internal market program. But I don't see that in any way, in any serious sense, among social democratic parties, for instance.
Well, I agree.
So I wonder if you have a comment to this, in a way, the de-ideologization of politics is something that stands out starkly, I think, which may explain that there is no mobilization apart from these sort of pitiful populist parties.
Well, I will go along with you a little bit of the way that Daniel Bell's end of ideology has certainly come. I certainly won't go along with you to believe that when journalists talk about populism, they are talking about a populist movement, as we in political science would understand it. There are very few common denominators at all that the soi-disant 99% possess. They are not in the same life chance situation. What it's allowed is something, I think, which is a lot more alarming than the elaboration of new ideologies. It's the expression of old prejudices. And what is the oldest prejudice of all time? Xenophobia. And xenophobia has been legitimated, whether it takes the form of let's wall off Mexico, let's put up razor wire around Hungary, let's do a Brexit or a Frexit. These are not justified. There's no ideology behind it. The idea that we would get back our borders goes completely counter the nature of the globalized, digitalized economy that we live in. Quite apart from the fact that, and that's why I laboured how difficult it is to understand, the majority of the population that voted for things like Brexit and may well next week vote for Frexit, if you ask them what a tariff is, they couldn't tell you. If you ask them how to spell it, they couldn't tell you. This is a non-ideological protest of often envy and hatred about asylum seekers. And we shouldn't hide the hatred. It's there. It's there in the streets. It was there in the jungle, which is perhaps one of the biggest disgraces that Europe has ever perpetrated. And I'm glad you started where you did do, Jana, with the original vision of Europe, because what better contrast could you have than that original, now dead vision and the camp at Calais, the jungle camp?
Thank you, Margaret. We have one time problem. The program must be changed a little bit because Pierpaolo told me that he has to leave at 11 o'clock for the press conference. And this means, since it's fair enough to grant him at least 15 minutes of discussion to his paper, we must begin sharp at 10:15 with your presentation. Therefore, I would really beg everybody who asks and who answers to be succinct. Next is Douglas.
Thanks, Maggie. It's a really interesting analysis that you have. It's a very interesting analysis. So I have a kind of a kindred question that I'm wondering whether you're thinking specifically of economic movements, because in the US sometimes we talk about the eclipse of the political economic left by the cultural left. And so what do you say, for example, about the identity politics and the social identity movements, like women's movement and so on?
Well, as a social theorist, I'm at complete variance with this use of the term identity politics. I think it's complete nonsense. It is completely unreflexive. It tells me that as a Brit, I have to have being British as part of my identity. I'm sorry, I don't. Reflexively, I refuse it. I'm a European, I'm not a Brit. And that goes for every other living human being. Because you are of a particular sex, it does not mean that that plays any significance in your own personal identity or the collectivities of people that you work with. You may think there are many, many other things that are more important than your sex and sexuality. What fantasies people weave about their own gender, I leave that to their dreams. So I cannot think of any serious movement which is based upon identity unless we make the very clear distinction, which I'm sure as fellow realists we do, between, say, race, which is a non-reality, and racism, which is extraordinarily real. Racism is extraordinarily powerful, and it's the power behind xenophobia, of course. But we have, it's asserted by racist groups, that we have good reason, just as they argued in the 50s. We had good reason for apartheid. We had good reason for denying civil participation. That's racism, that was real, that did real damage to real people. Identity does nothing, and it does even less when it's simply imposed on people by external social science investigators who make presumptions about people's interiority and reflexivity that may be entirely erroneous. So I don't regard that as... I know Americans go on about it a lot. They can bring it to Britain under the guise of Craig Calhoun, but it's not a useful analytical category. The only way in which people achieve an identity is reflexively in terms of what they are concerned about, what matters to them. And what matters to them may have no relationship whatsoever to their pigmentation, their marital status, whichever passport they carry. But things do matter to all of us, and those are the things that move us to action, including political action.
Rocco.
Thank you. Mrs. President, I would like to start exactly with your last remark. To Marx, identity of the proletariat was the result of a condition of exploitation. But not only of that. Georgi Lukács later, and Antonio Gramsci, the Italian, added one further dimension. The idea that there is a possibility of coming out of the situation of exploitation. That is a common consciousness that is activated by a common perspective, a struggle for something that is different. I have the idea that today, the first problem that we have is that there is no idea, that is not theoretical comprehension of the possibility of an alternative. And that's the reason why the left was dissolved. And the reason for this lack of alternative is that we have no politics. Politics is, that's an idea of Lord Ralph Dahrendorf. Politics is linked with the dimension of the nation state. But now, since the Marrakech Agreement, 1994, we, the politicians, do not control the economy. The economy has been globalized, and the nation state has remained local. European Union is already something better, it's broader, but nevertheless it is not adequate. And then the globalization of the power of money has not been counterbalanced by a globalization of the rights of workers. Compare the World Trade Organization and the Bureau International du Travail. Just if you look at the dimensions of the buildings in which they are lodged, you see what is the difference. I wonder whether this is one first problem. We had once, when I say we, I mean Helmut Kohl and his friends and me among them, an idea of a way of steering globalization, of governing globalization. But this idea has been lost. And populism is the result of the fact that nobody has any more an idea of a possibility of governing globalization, with the exception of Benedict XVI, Deus caritas est. He sets the real problem. The second problem that I see, well, the first one is a theoretical problem. Until you have an idea of a possibility of governing globalization, you cannot have movement, or you can have only movements of rebellion, of protest, movements willing to go back to the past, as the largest movements in Great Britain before the workers' movement. No. The workers' movement was oriented towards the future, not towards the past. And the protest originally was towards a desire to go back to the past, just like today. We want to go back to the past. The second issue, I think, is I completely agree with what you say about the church. I would specify people who are not gathered, who do not receive an identity through the fact of being workers, proletarians, can receive an identity through the fact of being fellow Christians, of belonging to a religious community. But the prevalent mentality of our times makes it impossible to make the transition from a religious engagement and a political engagement. We know it may be extremely dangerous, look at the Islamists, but on the other hand, if we block the movement that's starting with a religious perception of community, goes further to create the political dimension of community, then we lose the strongest force that has given a soul to our democracies. I think we have to come to grips with these two blocks, the theory and religion and democracy.
Very interesting. I'm surprised that we're as close to one another as we turn out to be. Because on your first point, yes, we use different terms, but what you're talking about is what I called centrism, for want of a better word. Now, the interesting concept you introduced was that of governing globalization. Now, to me, globalization is an effect. So what you will be talking about is controlling the kinds of effects that this process has. Fine. But I think, and I don't know whether you would agree with me here, I think that national government action, is not, it's finished, largely. Yes, I thought we agreed on this, but I wonder whether we agree on the next stage, which is that what has become vastly more important are the INGOs from the UN, International Labour Office, etc., etc., etc. Now, this is where the church is working, what the church is working through, these kinds of agencies. The church really isn't trying to influence national government at all. Be polite to them, and etc., etc. But it's much more interested in when the UN in 2015 was redesignating the new sustainable development goals, in having its own concerns inserted on that agenda. And it was a tremendous success. That really, at our first attempt at this, we succeeded. And clause 8.7 is remarkable, both for trafficking and for forced labour. And then when it came to December 2015 and the Paris meeting on climate change, this was a triumph of Laudato Si. So if one likes to sort of picture it as the INGOs as a kind of ladder. I know ladders don't go in a circular fashion, but it's not a process of getting, what have we got, 197 states? It's not a matter of getting half of those to agree independently. And then we signed something like the Kyoto Agreement, which the United States simply ignored and never signed, never did anything about. But we have all of these states willing to work through the UN. And just one last point on that, because it was, I thought, very significant about the church using this as a device for change. It was the hate mail that Marcello and I received from the Republican Catholic right in the States. The hatred was vitriolic. What have we done wrong? We had discussed human trafficking without mentioning abortion. We sort of looked at one another and said, well, what's the connection? But it's become a single issue movement there that they think they can still work through national politics on, whereas I'm trying to argue that the game has moved on, I think you're largely agreeing with me there.
Margaret, forgive me, we have only 6 minutes left. We want Piero to...
Shut up, in other words, yeah.
And I think it's fair that we give the other 3 persons who had raised their hand a chance. I suggest that each of you speaks 1 to 2 minutes, and that when you have a final answer to that, we should give them other persons also a chance to speak. So Stefano first.
Thank you, Maggie. Yes, I will be very brief. I would be interested in knowing your opinion on, among the ways to promote political participation on the model of deliberative democracy. It seems to me that this model, which substituted the older one, namely the so-called elitistic competitive model of democracy due to Schumpeter and before him to Max Weber, perhaps interprets many of the points that you have raised. In view, in particular, of the fact that one major cancer of political life today is short-termism. What Rocco said a few minutes ago, it's relevant. I remember a relevant piece of paper by Titmeyer, published, I believe, 10 years ago, where he says, I quote by heart, I am amazed that most politicians nowadays have not understood that their real power is almost nil, because they are at the service of the big multinationals and big financial capital. That is a quotation from Titmeyer. I mean, not from anybody, etc. So perhaps deliberative democracy, it's a way to cope with this short-termism, which, to conclude, I always remember with gratitude an episode of the Italian political life. After the war, the prime minister was De Gasperi. De Gasperi was, suggested, counseled by the American to promote an increase in the consumption levels and with the Marshall Funds money. And he said, no, I will use that money to do investment, not to increase the consumption. And the Italians were very poor in those days. And he said, because if I do consumption, Italy will always remain underdeveloped. On the other hand, he started an investment program, and in fact, the so-called Italian economic miracle. Why is that so? Because it was not fall into the trap of the short-termism. Thank you.
Thank you. John, short, please.
Right, my comment to your excellent presentation is the question about to what extent is the juridification of the citizen through contractual terms responsible for what you're describing. By that I mean every relationship that used to be by trust and by some form of continuity and legacy is now replaced by a commercial deal, and that includes the externalization of that relationship, including the exclusion of people who are on zero-sum contracts, the apparition of a contract that doesn't exist. Thank you.
Paolo, please, you have the last question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be extremely brief. So my question is, where does political Islam fit into this, or Islamism, as you will? Is it a movement that links the micro, meso, and macro, with the reflexive, relational, and representational aspects? If not, why not? And if so, what are the larger implications of recognizing it as such for our aim of a participatory society more broadly?
Margaret, please.
Islamism, or political Islam, if you will, depending how you wanted to label it. Yes.
Margaret, do you want to have a final answer? 2 minutes, please.
Well, you can either make it 2 minutes or 2 hours. I don't disagree with Stefano at all. Really nothing to say other than, yes, sure. I agree with John too that there was an awful lot of reification going on about employment and training and skills and almost everything else of that kind that you can think of. Why should people trust governments? Why should they be fooled into thinking that a 0-hour contract is a contract? Why should they be fooled when countries get away with the category of NEETs by saying, well, all school leavers must go on and do some course or other? We can do that. It costs money, but it doesn't necessarily lead to employment, a job, let alone the kind of job that anybody would necessarily want to do. In fact, there's a famous legal case that you can probably put me right on, about a young woman who had gained qualifications as a curator, museum curator, but she couldn't get a job. And so under this new scheme, we have no NEETs. She was paid by one of these bottom-of-the-market discount stores called Poundland. Every country has them, they just call them something different. And what was she employed to do? I think wash the floors. So this was actually a wastage of skill. It wasn't an answer to how do we get rid of NEETs. It was just how do we waste this woman's training and capacities. So the question of trust is a very important one, because each of these examples is something that will, in the long run, erode trust in government action. And it's having some nasty consequences already, in particular, because the social welfare bills are getting heavier and heavier for a variety of reasons, but one of the shared ones is that the populations of Europe demographically are getting older and older, more and more top-heavy, more requirement for medical services, beds, and social care. And this simply isn't forthcoming. What's the solution to that? Well, the trust erosion that came about, I'll give you one.
Margaret, we have to come to an end because at 11 Pierpaolo has to leave. Do you want to say something to Paolo's question about Islam? Do you still want to say something to Paolo's question about political Islam?
I think it's an issue that is far too complicated just to give a soundbite on. I'd rather not.
Good.
Thank
you. Thank you so much, Margaret.